Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Welcome back to the Disruptive Successor Show, the podcast where we dive deep into the strategies, mindsets, and innovations that help next generation leaders build thriving businesses. I'm your host, Jonathan Goldhill, and today we're tackling a topic at the very core of every successful organization, and that is its health. Joining me are the founders of Six Levers and the brilliant minds behind the book At the Heart of Work, Rethinking What It Takes to Build a Healthy Organization with the Six Levers framework. They've developed a powerful approach to help companies strengthen their leadership, culture, and performance by focusing on six essential levers: identity, leadership, focus, rhythm, cohesion, and momentum. In this episode, we'll explore what makes an organization truly healthy, how leaders can implement these six levers to drive success, and the practical steps businesses can take to build a strong, sustainable foundation for growth. Whether you're leading a family business, a startup, or a rapidly scaling company, this conversation will give you the insights and tools to rethink the way you approach leadership and organizational development. So let's dive in and welcome Joe Olwig and Shaun Lee to the show. By way of background, Joe, you served as the VP of Organizational Solutions at Mission Matters Group, and you hold a dual master's degree in Business Administration and Education Leadership from St. Louis University. And Shaun, you previously served as COO for Haven for Hope, the largest homeless service campus in the U.S., after earning your MBA from the University of Texas, San Antonio. So let's get started by talking about how you both came to write the book and develop your company. Joe and Shaun, who would like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. John, thanks so much for having us. It's been great to get to know you and just understand and learn about the common appreciation we have for frameworks and driving organizational change and building healthy teams. So thank you. I'd say we were practicing a number of other frameworks with our clients. We've worked with, over the last decade or so, hundreds of organizations, both a mix of nonprofits and for-profits, and kind of all sizes as well. And we're grateful for a lot of the tools we've used. We certainly dabbled in EOS and a lot of Lencioni's tools, or just helping teams to write, well-written OKRs and bring some rigor to tracking those goals that they've created together. But ultimately, we found in implementing a lot of those tools that something seemed to be missing. First, it was like this idea of an overarching, often invisible system behind the scenes that teams didn't even know was there, right? We just think of this as an organizational operating system, but it's like the thing that is living in every organization, even if it doesn't have a name, that connects all these common ways of working, right? How we create team priorities, how we work through conflict, or in some cases don't, right? Do either one of those things, right? But whatever those norms and practices are. And what we found is that all too often there was like a piecemeal approach to that work in organizations, right? And we even, Joe was also a former principal. Him and I had both been kind of like both in the lead and number two seat in a few different organizations. And we found that was also true for us when we were in those organizations. A lot of the time is that we would get really fired up about something, and then we would come back and try and implement with our team. And we had some success, but as you started to stack those things over time, it became more confusing and less coherent for the team on how all these things fit together. So we realized like there's really a need for teams that want to scale healthy ways of working to embrace this idea of an overarching system that connects all of the most important aspects that really make up what it feels like to work in an organization. So that was kind of part one. Maybe before I go on, Joe, do you want to add anything there?
Well, John, thank you for having us. Really excited to be here. But people often say you design products that you need more than maybe anyone else. And as Shaun pointed out there, when we were in the leadership seats prior to joining Six Levers, or starting Six Levers, we were searching for a more comprehensive solution to running our organizations, right? Had this, desire to bring more intentionality to the ways in which we were leading, right? The ways in which we were, systematizing the work that was going on inside of our organization. And as Shaun pointed out, as learners, we were both, running book clubs on the Advantage, in Lencioni's work, and we were going to PD and sending people to these different trainings to come back and bring these solutions. But there was never this sort of comprehensive framework structure to connect the learning and the solutioning back to. And so it was really through those experiences, and then beginning to put some of those solutions into practice with our clients, that we came to this pretty important point, which was a lot of the issues that we're finding inside of organizations are being suggested as people issues, right?
Yeah.
You got to have the right people on the bus. You gotta get the right people in the right seats. Absolutely. Right. And oftentimes, if we look upstream from those issues, what we find is that there's a system, right, that's imperfect and would benefit from some revisioning, right? And as you start to do that over and over again and see these different patterns, you start to appreciate that, if we just embrace this as an overarching system that sort of underlies all of the work, let's give that a name, and let's, like we do, like we've done throughout the course of history, when we have these conceptual ideas, let's give it a framework, right? To give it common language and structure, right? So that we can do something with this concept. And so, it was beginning to implement that framework, Six Levers, with organizations. And then Shaun had this great idea. Let's write a book about it. Let's bring it forward, in the form of a book, which I'm super grateful for that idea.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
a few comments. One is the hardest thing is whether to pronounce it levers or levers, but that's a small comment aside.
Yeah.
Maybe it depends on what part of
Yeah, we
the,
think I think it's
the
West Coast in Canada goes levers, it seems,
okay.
John.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the other way around for East Coast
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I think what's both also really fascinating is both of you presumably came out of the nonprofit segment, right, Joe? I assume you're the
That's right.
principal of the school, and so you were applying these in nonprofits, and the playbooks, operating systems, performance platforms that we're both familiar with. Most of those exclusively operate in a for-profit world, and I know the scaling up organization, which I was certified in for a handful of years. They attempted a foray into the educational and nonprofit segment, but I don't think with any great success. So that's just, I think, kudos to you that, and I ran a nonprofit for 10 years. So
Mm.
we ran it as a business because we were a economic development center and we understood business and economic, that we understood business because it was more of a business development center. So The other thing, though, that I think is really interesting is that you referred to going upstream and talking about a system. And I
Mm.
think with most small businesses, when you go upstream, you find that there is no system, that they never had a system, and
Right.
that by default, the system is a set of behaviors, norms, practices, unspoken values that are very, um, how do I say it, like
We,
muddy.
we would say accidental, right?
Accidental for sure, but
Yeah.
also just not clear.
Right.
It wasn't
Right.
clear that I was supposed to come in at 8:30 in the morning, or it wasn't clear that I was
Yeah.
supposed to respond to an email within 24 hours, or it wasn't clear what professionalism meant as a value in our professional services company. And
Yeah.
so accidental, absolutely. Unclear, muddy, like how could you ever fire anyone if it's unclear what their performance expectations, what the team or company's goals or priorities or the metrics that we were tracking or what the values that and norms that we have to live by. And so what you two have done so nicely is put a framework together that dives deeper into these organizational behaviors, if you will. And so that's what I applaud you about. And I think that we should go no further and start defining
Hmm.
what an organizational operating system is. Um, so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
what, do
Yeah. And do you want to do, John, would it be helpful for us to walk through the framework a bit
I
or,
think
and
so. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, and maybe just to keep building on what Joe said there, and before we answer that question was, as we were doing that work with so many organizations, the six levers were created by these like very common set of recurring patterns and issues that we saw. Like, so when we went upstream, right, and we said, look, what's at the core of these patterns we're seeing within organizations, we saw they fell into like these six broad categories. Like one, like so identity, for example, we could say, well, they were experiencing some mission drift or some chasing shiny objects because a lot of their strategy and vision or even like more near-term priorities weren't anchored well to their kind of their deep forever sense, their why of who they are,
Hmm.
right? And so we need to spend time maybe expanding beyond just a mission statement and look at the underlying beliefs. And then when it comes to like cultural pillars such as values, just leaning into Lencioni's work, or another piece of that we've created is called tenets, and tenets are really just the principles and how we want our systems to work, right? And
Hmm.
so that's all identity work, and even defining what success looks like, right?
Yeah.
So how are we going to measure success? Like we would say that's a part. We call those vitals. Like that's a part of your identity as well. So we saw like a lot of issues stem there. Focus is another lever. Similar thing.
Can I just
This
interrupt for a second and go back
please.
to identity? Because
Yeah.
as you were talking about that, I was thinking of just as a child becoming a young adult.
Mm.
Their identity is wrapped up oftentimes in their vitals. How tall am I? Am I tall enough? Am I too short for my age?
Yeah.
How's
Mhm.
my weight? And so
Mm.
all of those things, Jim Collins talks a lot about core ideologies and core
Mm.
values and core purpose or mission. Those have been clearly articulated, but what you guys have done is take it to another level and
Mm.
added some other dimensions like tenants, like vitals, and you even use mission and beliefs and
Mhm.
separate those two. And so I like
Mm.
that. I think that's really good stuff. Takes it much deeper. And as I was reading your book, I was thinking about a company that I've worked with and the transformation that they went from,
Yeah.
where they went from one set of behaviors, like the ones you talk about in your book of when you're having conversations around your performance or around like a performance improvement plan versus having a conversation around how can we live more of our values and be more, intentional. And
Mhm.
so
Mm.
there was a real shift in I think as organizations mature and become better at this,
Mhm.
they shift from like a set of behaviors that look like there's a lot of victims and shaming and blaming to a lot of very positive, you know, not, but a lot of positive, being vulnerable. I'll let you continue, but I
Yeah.
liked what you did with identity, and you took it a lot further. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, John. Maybe just to respond to that, and Joe, then I'll maybe let you talk about focus and some other levers here. I'm glad I'm sure Joe is too. Glad to hear that resonates because I think one incredible benefit of taking the time to clarify your identity and more than just mission and values is that it gives everyone this like real common set of criteria to debate about, to like to your point, to hold people accountable to hold ourselves accountable to in a way that's much more clear. Like that when we've done that work to flesh that out, like there's really no longer any mystery. And so much of what goes wrong behaviorally or from an expectations perspective is, I think we would say, is because there is still a lack of clarity around like what are the pillars of our identity and culture. And so we try and do that work like with, in clarifying that. But the second part of it is activating it, right? So we've all probably been a part of organizations where it feels a bit like smoke and mirrors, and like you even maybe your onboarding is great, maybe it's somewhere, but then you get into the reality and it feels different. Part of identity lever is not just clarity in defining it, but clarity in activating it, that
Yes.
identity throughout all of your systems and ways of working as well.
Yep. Very good. Yeah. I mean, we always talk about core values. How can you live them? How can you make them come to life? And someone could probably write an entire book about how to bring core values to life in a business.
Totally.
And you've definitely written a chapter on it. So
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to keep going through all six of the levers, it would be helpful to just think about that definition of an operating system. So earlier you talked about, the organizations that, when you go upstream, you see very little definition around norms, structures, process, routines. And so if you think about each of the levers, it's how do we create and systematize norms, process, structure, routines within these different dimensions, right? That again,
right.
as Shaun pulled out, are a function of these patterns that we were identifying with the organizations that we were working with. So, take focus, right? It's how do we create and leverage focus across our organization? So how do we do that in a more systematic way? And, the focus lever is all about things that we're familiar with, but maybe we don't do well, which is set goals, right, in meaningful ways, right, around the things that matter most, and with a high bar for accountability around monitoring and achieving those goals. How do we prioritize on a quarterly basis, right, and create clear team-wide quarterly priorities? So it's tools and structures that help an organization to create and harness focus, right? So important in a time when things are changing all the time. How do we still leverage this thing that's so valuable, which is having focus with our team around measurable goals, and still go after and achieve those, right?
Yes.
So focus. Another lever is rhythm. So we sort of think about focus and rhythm as the great duo, the pair that really work well together and make the most of each other. So rhythm is all about how do we leverage the power of habit inside of our organization? How do we create a cadence, an operating rhythm, right, that brings consistency, accountability, right, to the ways in which we work? So this involves meeting rhythms, but effective ones. How are we designing our key meeting rhythms to bring some habit to the work that is so important? How do we bring some rhythm to monitoring goals, priorities? But ultimately, how are we harnessing the power of habit and placing it on top of the key activities that we're responsible for as leaders of an organization, but oftentimes are left to chance? So a few more. I'll pass back to Shaun to keep.
Maybe just one thing to add to rhythm there is, John, and I'm sure audience, you've probably all heard the expression, it could have been an email. This meeting could have been an email, right? And my response to that is usually, yeah, but people don't read their emails, right? So we're kind of in this this cycle that just points back to the other one, but no, it's not resolving anything.
Right.
And so I think that I use that example just to say that, part of the what we hope teams will understand in embracing the idea of bringing more intention to their rhythms is even identifying, this thing that we do on a recurring basis, right? Whether it's meeting as a leadership team or whether it's a important set of communications, the first question, like we hope they begin to ask, is what objective are we trying to achieve, right? And then in doing that, you may find, like to the funny story about it could have been an email, maybe it's synchronous, maybe it's asynchronous, right? But you don't really know until you first define what is the objective you're trying to achieve with this thing that you do on a recurring
Mm-hmm.
basis,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is where we think like the power of common language, where we hope a team will look at each other and say, hey, I think something might be off with our rhythm about how we do XYZ. Could we talk about adjusting this? Right? It's sometimes we see teams that like their weekly updates are going on in
Yeah.
their team context, and someone raises their hand and says, I think half of these
'Cause-
would be fine in a Slack channel if we will
yeah.
commit to reading them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we can questions, issues we have, we can bring those to the team meeting, right? But it's really empowering the team to even like this is back what we said about the invisible part of this. What we find is most teams don't even know that they can do that, right?
Right.
They're
No,
just kind of like, this is how we meet, this is how it works. Like no one's feels empowered to raise their hand and say, this doesn't feel like it's working. Can we do something different?
Mhm.
Right. And so much even like at a meta level, like the idea of an operating system is that's what we want. That's what we hope teams will be able to do. And the idea of, an operating system and a framework is just to make it that much easier to
sure.
invite them to enter into it.
Sure. All right. So which ones did we cover? We covered identity. We
Yeah.
covered rhythm. We covered
Yeah.
focus.
We got cohesion, leadership, and momentum. So cohesion is really about the power of strong, connected teams built on a foundation of trust and psychological safety.
Yeah.
Right. So we really lean into probably two different important source materials in this one. One being Five Dysfunctions with Lencioni.
Of course.
Another one being the work of Project Aristotle that Google ran, which
Mm-hmm.
is basically their own internal analysis of like what makes an effective team. And I think if I remember correctly, they even had a question in their mind of like, do we even need teams and leaders to accomplish our work? Like they were that open about the wondering, not just like what makes an effective team, but like are teams even effective? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so they got on the other end of that research and they found out that yes, teams are effective and here are the characteristics of them. Well, they arrived in some similar places as Lencioni did in Five Dysfunctions, with the foundation in both cases being a strong foundation of trust and psychological safety, being an absolute like starting point and requirement
Mm-hmm.
before the other characteristics will before you can even work on them, such as like being accountable and dependable to each other, achieving meaningful results together, right? Those things that
Mm-hmm.
um, so I think it's an important distinguishment to say like psych safety and trust is a important foundation, and yet that alone does not equal a high performing team. I think sometimes we have to remind teams about this when they're spending a lot of time working on this because it's so important. But
Yeah.
then it's like, yeah, now we also got to achieve some ambitious goals together, right? Now that we've done that, we can spar, we can set ambitious goals, etc. So yeah, and within that, we help the framework helps teams to develop what we think of as like agreements, right? So where there's a recurring tension or lack of clarity, again, someone would say, hey, I think maybe we need to form an agreement about this thing that keeps happening to us, right? That we keep experiencing, that we
Mm-hmm.
keep coming back to and not resolving. So again, just kind of helpful language for teams to be able to do that. And then back to rhythm, then they're monitoring those agreements, then they're running retrospectives. How did we do in pursuit of this new agreement, right? So that's all. Cohesion is all about the power of a strong trust, cohesive teams built on trust.
So
Joe, maybe I'll yeah.
let's dialogue about that a little bit because I think this is a sticky area,
Mhm.
one that I really am fascinated with, but also troubled by,
Mhm.
because achieving psychological safety in an organization obviously depends upon the person at the top and their willingness and their ability to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And many leaders, some older leaders that I've worked with, come out of a command and control style leadership and being vulnerable, being, or maybe they come out of maybe the military, which I'm not that familiar with, but it's more command and control style. Being vulnerable, um, providing psychological safety is not necessarily what they do. Let's, I don't want to get political, but I will for a moment. Let's take our current president of the United States. He does not provide an atmosphere of psychological safety. Those around him know that if they step out of line, they could hear those famous words from The Apprentice, "You're fired." Um, and and also our allies and other countries don't really necessarily know. So we're not playing well together as a team with our allies because there isn't psychological safety. My point isn't about Donald Trump here. My point is about leaders who have an autocratic behavioral tendency or style, or have trouble admitting that they were wrong. So, they don't pass the 5 dysfunctions or 5 cohesive behaviors of a team test very well. This is really difficult. And now, if you take this organization to task and become very process oriented around psychological safety and trust, you're now going to kill momentum.
Yeah.
You're also going to, it's going to be really difficult because now you're going to be doing rigorous analysis. You're going to be, we need to learn before we can move forward. All these things that you talk about. So this is why I think it's a fascinating area. I think it's a super important, and I love that you brought it up and you've dived deep into it. I think that organizations could get really stuck in this area if and it almost, I read the book with the bias of, well, this book, and you could say this about EOS, you could say this about Scaling Up or my book. This book is great for those who are true believers and want and believe that this is a system that could work for them. But if they're not, they think they already know that,
Yeah.
and they already do that, or they don't need to learn this, then it's game over before it begins.
Yeah, I think, John, one thing you're pointing out and noticing is the interconnectedness of the different levers, right? So
Yes.
in this example here, we're appreciating that in order for a team to establish team psychological safety, it starts from the top. And the leadership lever is the lever that directly addresses the leadership component of the organization. Now, there's a few different dimensions to it. One is that appreciation that the number one driver of an organization's performance is ultimately the effectiveness of the leadership team, right?
Mm-hmm.
How accountable, how cohesive is that leadership team? And then the other dimension inside the leadership lever is really a belief, right? And it's a belief in the capacity of people to grow and to perform, right? And so it's an appreciation for the traditional hierarchy that exists inside organizations, and ultimately appreciating the power that is held at the leadership team level, and that ultimately they are the stewards of the system, the primary stewards of the operating system. But then it's, how do we systematically develop leadership in people, right? And elevate the leadership within the people inside of our organization on this belief that it's possible for anyone, right? And in this regard, we're not talking about a role, we're talking about the ability to show up day-to-day basis with self-awareness, with vulnerability, with curiosity, right? These core skills that are just helpful for any role that we're in. And so that's what the leadership lever is all about, is how do we develop that across our organization and create a culture of leadership. But your point here is all the reason why our work oftentimes begins at the executive team level,
Sure.
because we know if we're not instilling some of these, beliefs and aligning on some of these core behaviors that impact psychological safety, right? That
Yeah.
impact some of these other pieces. The trajectory is far less steep, right? We want to help organizations really build enduring health, and in the absence of a leadership team committed to some of those behaviors and practices, we're gonna stall out.
Yeah. Well, so let's keep moving forward because we've got a lot more to cover, and
Yeah.
we're getting into the sixth lever. I want to talk about maybe or explore any other I common challenges to obstacles organizations face when adopting this framework, and maybe how they can overcome them. Um, and then I want to get into what's the practical implementation like, what it would be the initial steps that you'd recommend if someone wants to get started with this. So let's talk about any other common challenges besides beyond psychological safety.
Yeah. Well, I think one where it's actually, well, I don't know if it's maybe a cousin to psychological safety, but what you're talking about here, Jonathan, is like just the idea of how challenging it can be for people that like aren't already believers here. And you used a political example. Maybe I'll get a little philosophical and spiritual here. As a way to say, I would also, another way to describe like the type, the like more authoritarian or command and control leader style is one that is like just purely results driven, right? It's about managing people to achieve a certain set of results, and that's your view. Like, people are resources, they're a means to an end. And I feel like I've had this conversation. I have two teenage kids. Like, I'm trying to make sense of this even for my kids, like, who are wondering, like, hey, Dad, like, there's so much that we hear you say you don't like about leaders like Donald Trump and their leadership style specifically, and yet he's achieved all this success. So, like, help us understand that, right? And I would say, well, it all depends on what your definition of success is, right? Like, what life you want to live. And
Right.
so we hope that, I mean, this is an obstacle, in that, like, if it requires a mindset of both, like, we want to achieve greater results, but we also want the journey to be meaningful and full of life as we do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we tried to design the framework to do both, like, to say, to accomplish the results, and to also say, and we hope and we think it will be life-giving when it's meeting some of your fundamental human needs. Right. I know that might sound a bit like a progressive thing, but honestly, we just think that these are just like truths about humanity, right? Like, we all need greater clarity in our work. We all need the ability to make more and more of a contribution. We all need the ability to feel more meaning in our work. Like, whether we can say that or not,
Yeah.
there's going to be a wide spectrum, but like, we think and believe from experience that it's just true. Like, so an obstacle, can be that, for folks that maybe don't hold that view, right? That if they're just purely results oriented,
Right.
it can be challenging to help them understand. Ultimately, what we try to do is to help them see how one feeds the other, right? How ultimately, through meeting human needs, people are going to be more engaged, they're going to be more energized, and they're going to show up in the most productive way possible as part of your team.
As I think about your system, um, I'm drawn to it. I think it's aspirational,
Mhm.
and that's the part of it that I like. And as I think of the subtitle to a competing system like EOS in the book Traction, I think the subtitle is like, get a grip on your business. It's because things are so out of control that it's
Yeah.
like you need to put some systems in place that are just going to bring some basic control.
Yeah.
But, and so that's almost speaks to people that are on a treadmill and can't get off of it versus people who are thinking about their entire fitness, and are looking at other ways. Okay.
Yeah.
Where does someone get started? How would you recommend initial steps? I mean, obviously reading the book is probably the best first step. Is read the book, get a concept of what we're talking about here, and then ask yourself, are you in or are you out? Is this what you want? But like, what's your approach? What do you tell people?
Maybe just one last thing, because you brought up the
Sure.
EOS subtitle.
Yeah.
I think our hope, the subtitle there is, implement this, apply this, appreciate this, so that people can become engaged,
Yeah.
right? So what Shaun described there, like, the whole purpose here is org health,
Yeah.
is this belief that org health is a worthy end in and of itself. And we
Mm.
really think about org health as maybe there's the lifeblood of org health, or the key metric for org health is you have an incredibly engaged workforce,
Yeah.
right? People, so adopt the system if that's what you want, and then know the results are going to come, right? And if they don't, everybody is incredibly empowered and finding meaning in their work. So maybe that's actually the better outcome anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we might make that argument. So I think just that contrast, I think, is an important one, because that was a huge part of one of our design principles of Six Levers was, we believe that when employees are involved in shaping how work works, they're more engaged and the organization is more resilient.
And
So
Gallup has done some good research on
yeah,
this, Joe, to support the
absolutely.
higher employee engagement scores, the greater the earnings per share of
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah.
And so if people are looking for proof beyond just like anecdotal, like it feel good, like this is something that's going to feel better, there's real data to support that companies grow faster, grow better, are more innovative, more profitable, and have workforces that stick
Mhm.
around
Mm.
Yeah.
and are more engaged. So,
Absolutely.
okay, cool.
Yeah. Do you want me
Yeah.
to, Joe, you want me to take the
So
how to get
pra-
started with us,
practical
or
implementation, yes, please.
yeah,
Yeah.
or just in the Six Levers framework, and Joe, fill in anything that I miss here. But there's
Yeah.
really probably three core ways. The first one, Joe started to mention a little bit, but it's really focusing with the senior leadership team. We have a 6-month journey we call Leading Together, and it's really built to just to help them become a cohesive, high performing leadership team. And it works. We think of it as kind of an immersive experience because it does include some core training, but it also includes kind of a side rhythm of coaching with the CEO and or like someone that we call a navigator who might be more involved in the day-to-day systems and operations. But it also includes some observation, like we're after the things we're training and they're doing, like we're giving them some feedback and really just helping them to implement quickly and learn through doing. That's really the spirit of the momentum lever, which is the sixth lever, is just to really like learn and experiment and adjust and make rapid iteration as a team. So that first one is just like a journey for a leadership team
Hmm.
to walk through parts of the framework and become cohesive and high performing. The
And
other
the
one is like,
navigator is someone inside the organization or
yeah, thank
outside?
you. Yeah,
Yeah,
inside the
that's what I
organization.
thought.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. So working with that person inside.
Hmm.
And then you probably think of the second one as more like strategic planning. So this is
Yeah.
we have a tool that we've developed called the Compass, which is really just sort of a strategic orientation tool that aligns those 6 parts of your identity. It's like directional vision, and then we work teams to translate that to a scorecard that becomes a bit more measurable and trackable. We really think of this as a pretty quick process because we want to get them into like thinking of strategic planning as something you're doing much more in the near term and not something that you just do every 3 to 5 years. So for some teams, it's a shift from, oh, this is something I do every 3 years. This is something you do every 3 months.
Hmm.
And so that's probably the second most common way people get started with the framework. And then the other one is we have a leadership development course that we've designed called Leading with Intention. And that's designed for like, it's more, whereas Leading Together is 4 teams to go through together. Leading with Intention is more for like individual leaders that really want to work on sharpening and improving their like the relational side of their leadership. Some of the things we've talked about, like just how do I, even in psychological safety, we have a tool we've developed called the builders and breakers of psych safety, which
Hmm.
is just doing kind of an inventory on your own behaviors and beginning to work on some of those things. But it's also how to show up more like a coach, how to lead with more vulnerability, how to develop more self-awareness. Those are the type of topics that we're covering in Leading with Intention. And we also do executive coaching uh, with a number of different CEOs and executive directors.
Gotcha. Any case studies or success stories that you'd like to highlight that you think are really great examples of the work?
Yeah, Joe, you probably
Yeah.
got one.
Yeah. Well, I think, the most common case study, I won't name specific organizations, but if there's one that there are a handful of, it's where we've been brought in to be a part of that strategic planning process. And that has, historically been one of the most common entry points to the work. But once we go through that process of aligning on identity and re-energizing that identity, and then creating that vision for the next 3 to 5 years in the form of whether it's your OKRs for your 3 years, then beginning to work with that executive team and helping them to adopt the framework, right?
Hmm.
and staying there for 6 months to a year where they're implementing different aspects of the framework. And then the third piece of the case study is bringing that down to their core teams. Core teams we sort of refer to as the leadership teams of the different functional areas, different departments, different programs. So we really think about that as the mechanism for scaling these same mindsets, skills, practices, structures, right, is through core teams. And it really looks like a rinse and repeat, but now in a cohort model where we're actually bringing some of that same learning and content to the core teams, and they begin adopting the framework. We've got organizations who have ran that play, and I think grown in incredible ways, from a budget and sort of revenue perspective, but more importantly, who report back that this work, be it they refer to it as the six levers framework or our leading with intention course, because that's oftentimes laced through, that this was really the difference maker, right? And in terms of shifting their trajectory as an organization, and giving them permission to prioritize this work, because oftentimes the work on the business is just not something that people feel like they can really prioritize. And so
Right.
by naming some of these these objectives within the engagement, we really give them permission to say, hey, working on the system is worthy of our time.
Yeah.
And look what happened when we did that 3 or 4 years later.
Yeah. Any
Yeah.
other outcome sound bites, Shaun, that people say about the program? These would be like snippets of testimonials. People say like, this really worked. Kind of just
Yeah.
piggybacking on what Joe just said.
Yeah. I mean, I think one organization, and I won't name names, but that it comes to mind is, they're kind of a large nonprofit. They went from like 25 million in revenue to like 75 million in revenue. And we've gotten lots of great feedback from them. But one of the things they've said is that really they just felt like they had a framework for growth for the first time, right? It's a framework to consider different strategic opportunities as a team, whereas that might have sat with just the CEO for a while. And they've been through like different acquisitions, as part of their growth strategy. And they really, the team, I think what they've reflected back to us is that the framework made it possible for the team to like fully participate in that process as a unit, and more cohesive. So yeah, and then I think the other piece of good like soundbite feedback we've gotten from a handful of clients is that the tools and the framework have really helped them to navigate crises. And and we've even particular around COVID, or even just like for some of our clients in particular, ones in the nonprofit sector right now that we're serving, like they're in yet another time of crisis, because of some of the policy and executive orders that are coming down. They don't know what's going to happen from some of their core funding streams, but they're leaning into the tools, right? They're doing some contingency planning. They're bringing focus. They're changing their rhythms, and all in a way that I think gives them a sense of hopefulness and how they will respond in a time of crisis.
Okay, so you've written the book. When did it come? What was the date of publication? And
depends on October 23rd or October 12th. I think there's like maybe two.
It was
year?
October 23rd. It was my wife's birthday.
Of 2024?
Yeah, last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's brand new. So the question really is there a seventh lever that you thought about afterwards and someone said, you missed one? Or
yeah. That's so good. We used to only get this from like clients, either jokingly or we've had some legitimate recommendations like, hey, I think there's a seventh lever.
Of course, there's always a client who's an innovator in our systems and says, I think maybe this one, whatever. Yeah. So
well, and then I was just going to share that since the book came out, there's been I've had so many people within my personal network have been who have offered that, wondering, but what about the seventh lever? What's the seventh lever?
On the seventh day, God created no levers.
Right.
So,
one thing I will say, John, is I think that, and no disrespect to the people that are thinking and have those ideas, but oftentimes the things that they're thinking of are not broad enough.
Yeah.
Right. They're very like narrow ideas. And we're like, well, that's not fitting the criteria that we held for each of these six levers, right? And I would argue that's sort of some of the limitation of like
Yeah.
some other frameworks, right? Is that they're
Yeah.
like the containers in which teams are working within aren't broad enough to be able to be
Right.
applied in enough different contexts. So
Right.
Yeah.
So,
the
well,
answer
look,
is no. We don't have a seventh lever.
that's great. Great to hear. Um, so for those who are listening, I think that the contributions that Sean Lee and Joe Olwig, I'm pronouncing your last name right,
That's good.
Yep.
have made here are really significant. And if you're paying attention to some of the different playbooks or frameworks that business operating systems that entrepreneurs, small businesses, even medium-sized businesses are using to scale their businesses, to make work more exciting, fulfilling, rewarding, profitable. Like there's a great contribution here in this OS that you've put together. And, I think there's a lot of focus today, I know from myself in particular, on artificial intelligence, AI.
Mm,
And we're looking for AI to replace a lot of fundamental things, like maybe we can use AI as our personal coach and learn how to ask really good questions, and we can develop ourselves as leaders. And um, all these things are really good, but the difficulty becomes when you're working with others in a team. I don't think there's any AI that can interpret, predict, or maybe even influence how others are going to respond or behave,
mm,
especially under stress or tension. And so, what we've got here in this OS is a framework that goes beyond just a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or Enneagram or some other type of behavioral assessment framework that allows people to really dive deep into organizational health, to make your meetings more effective, to make your relationships better, to make work more rewarding,
mm,
and to make that why of why you get out of bed to go to this particular company to work, whether it's remote or in an office, makes it more rewarding. So I just want to thank you guys for being on the show, and for making the contribution that you have, and throw it over to you for any final words,
well,
if you
maybe
have
just
any.
say thank you, John. I mean, you're someone who is such a student of so many different frameworks and systems. It's humbling that you would find value in what we've created. I think it was, and I mean this, and not as faux humility, but a humble offering of, as Joe mentioned, two people who are love learning and in some ways feel like there's nothing new under the sun, but in other ways feel
Right.
like there's still an opportunity to package and arrange things in a way that just makes pursuing organizational health that much more approachable. So we hope that we people that read the book feel that way, and super grateful for you for having us on.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah, John, very energizing call here today. Appreciate having the space to talk through some of this and get your perspective and insight on what resonated about the book, the framework, and I think we've got some notes for continued learning ourselves coming out of today. Uh, yeah, our hope with the book is that it sparks a curiosity and an energy in leaders, to say there's a better, more intentional way to run the organization. And maybe I leverage all six of the levers. Maybe it's three or four. Maybe I have my own custom, right? We talk about the importance of really embracing the operating system as your own and making it your own. But if that can spark some growth and some momentum in those organizations, and some belief in what's possible when you engage your employees in a meaningful way, then it's all been worth it. So I hope that this um, adds to that, and your audience might find
Shh.
some value
Sorry.
in that as well, including your pup.
Yep. Sorry about that. First time that's ever happened in 190 episodes. Doorbell rang. So we're talking about the book At the Heart of Work: Rethinking What It Takes to Build a Healthy Organization with the Six Levers Framework. guys, thanks so much. Understand that anyone can pick up this is a recipe, but you don't have to start from the beginning. You can pick up any particular lever and start working with that, and then add another lever. So, all right, guys, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate it.
All right, folks, you know where to pick up a copy of the book, and you know what to do. If you like this show, give us a great review, share the episode with others, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session.
Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.